to make, which are immature, based off of proving his masculinity. Like, he literally berated this girl's looks for from her face to her complexion to her hair. How do you know her hair would frizzle in the rain? It's not something that somebody that is very vain pay attention to. Like, it does. Hello and welcome back to our reading, another installment in our reading series. And for our current series, we are reading Revolutionary Road. And before that, I just wanted to do a little thing. I recently posted a video where I picked a title for August, and I picked just one title for August because I really doubted my ability to finish more than to even complete one book for the month of August. Like, I was really ready for my usual, delays or my slow process of reading. But surprisingly, I'm done with the title that I picked, and in just what 13 days, yeah. So I decided, and to be honest, as excited as I was to read Diary of a Mad Housewife, it was absolutely not what I was expecting, and not in a good way. Actually, I went in with a lot of expectations. I tried to say a lot of mental breaks, leading to outward behaviors or outward extreme forms of behaviors. Actually, well, what can I say? I love all those kind of all those kind of stuff. But like, it's not entirely my fault because the story alludes to such outcomes. Yeah. So I was like, when I read the summary, when I read the first chapter, the whole writing in a diary, the whole hiding, yourself from the world to scribble down the things that you think are driving you insane. I was really expecting more, I should say. But at the end of the day, it turned out to be a kind of the way Kate Moss did that staring Met Gala in the eye, with that camera, that meme that she now came out in the most disappointing dress. Like, there was really nothing. Like, it's not just disappointing that the dress was bad. It was just flat, bland, you know. It wasn't even an ugly dress. It just was not what all the hype around it presented it like. The hype around it, the way she built up the expectations, just the feeling of that whole process, like, that is what this book is. And I feel like I can't just let my August slide away, just me just reminiscing on how much I got so pissed off at the book. At some point she starts an affair, she's frustrated with her husband, and then she starts an affair with a man that she meets. Like, the thing is, the whole thing, she starts an affair with a man, and it's not just like an affair that you think, okay, exciting affair. It was all this stupid nonsense kind of affairs where they hate each other, but they still sleep with each other, and they have sex, and there's moments of tenderness, and you think, okay, maybe there's something there, but like, there's nothing there, because eventually the affair ends with her having a pregnancy scare and him not handling it well. Like, he literally, well, she hit him first, she hit him first in response to something he said. Maybe he was suspecting her or something. But like, when she hit him so, like, with all of her might, he hit her so bad that she described it as seeing stars. And then her husband saw her face all bloated and huge and swollen. It was just very icky. And then it was set in this period where, I don't know what period America was in there. I think it was mostly maybe after the civil rights movement, where black people could have jobs, but obviously they could not have nothing more. They could not have anything higher than cleaning jobs, subservient jobs. They're not allowed to progress and advance in society in that sense. Yeah. So there's a lot of description here by the woman and her husband, like the main character and her husband, which is like the woman, the female character, the main character. What's her name? Bettina is cool and all, but she's what we call a liberal at that time. So being a liberal means you obviously stand for the rights of immigrants and just persons of color and all that, but you cannot really stand for it when women's rights were still like low down, like bottom barrel, at the point where women didn't even have rights. Yes, it was that period too that women didn't have rights. And like, as a white woman, but for some reason, the way the narration went, I kept picturing her as a black woman. I don't know why, but she's a white woman married to a white man, and they are very rich, very privileged, and the man goes gets up, like he started his career running, like doing all this liberal nonsense, and then it's nonsense because at the end of the day it was just a front, because when things didn't go in his way, he wanted to be a governor and he didn't win 2 times after running. He was dispirited, gave up on life, disillusioned and all of that, and his wife still held on to her beliefs, but she could not speak up because women were she says things like feminine, the feminine women, the feminine woman, you know, like doing your job, handling the house. They had this massive apartment that was located right in Central Park, and like she had a maid, not a living maid, but she was expected to handle the waxing of the floor. She didn't do it herself, but she was like running a whole home, you know, and her husband did not lift a finger to help our sister, only on those rare occasions we wanted to like make eggs for breakfast for children. So all those kind of dynamics, you know, it was very interesting at first, because it was like this kind of thing going to make any normal person snap, and that's what the story was alluding to. But at the end of the day, ended that the affair did not go anywhere. She was not pregnant, you know, her period was just late, and her husband started going for therapy. Oh, there's therapy. They used to call it analysis. They call it analysis of the head. Like some call it therapy or a shrink. They just call it analysis of the head. Like it's just a lot of things, you know. It was just icky, like reading the dialogue, the perspective of a white American woman on just the way America was then, like just shit crap nonsense, you know, that I forced myself to get through, and like it's just horrible. But today is not about reviewing it, because I just felt I'm saying all of this because I just want to pick another title from here. After making the raffle and putting it in this very pretty container of mine, I did not remove it because I don't know, I just felt maybe I'll be able to pick another, but I didn't vocalize it because I didn't want my brain to feel like, oh no, so much work. No, it's not work. We're going to do something exciting, picking a random title from this container. So I'm shaking it well. When I pick, then after picking this is that when we start the story. So I'm really shaking it, hoping to pick from this pile of books I have here. Oh, yeah. Like I know what I got, expecting something, but now I will be careful and I will not, you know, like you can't really judge a book by its cover. Like you think I'll know that, yeah, but so I'm going to pick from this. The titles are already written in the container, and just for me to like select one randomly. So yeah, then after that we're going to go to our story of the day, our chapter of the day. How many of you are excited to get into the reading? And how many of you have read Revolutionary Road? Would you think of picking a copy? You know, like would you think of checking out the book or downloading it or having it online? Whatever. Just let me know how your experience of my reading has been so far. Even though it doesn't really matter, I'm just going to continue reading because I enjoy reading, and it's interesting to deceive myself like that I'm reading several books at a time, even if I read one chapter every week and I don't like it, whatever. I'm rambling at this point. I already picked one, but I dropped it back because I was talking. So let's pay attention and keep it. Okay, this is I should have helped me done that one. God, this book, oh, like you guys, oh, I'm going to 13th of August, yeah? So like just one day away from the middle of August. How am I supposed to finish this title in like the rest of the month? Like, okay, Vampire Diaries, that's what I picked. Oh my god. So if I finish it, I'm still going to do another raffle of it. If I finish it before the end of June, before the end of August, which I'm not putting up any bets, I'm not laying any bets on it. I might not even pass one chapter in this story, but I like the fact that I was like surprised of picking Vampire Diaries, bro. Oh fuck. And this is it. Ta-da! LJ. What was her name? LJ Smith, yes. So, the Vampire Diaries, The Fury and the Road. I think this is the final installation in it. Oh, yeah, I think this is the final installation of it. And this is 2 volumes in one, right? The Fury and Dark Reunion. The first one is The Awakening and the Struggle. Okay. I don't know if you can see, but like, yeah, I'm just showing you. I like the font already. It's gothic, And I was thinking about, the word gothic has been floating in my head like for like all of today or some of yesterday too. So like, yeah, Vampire Diaries. I will see you for the rest of August. Thank you. So now, can we get on revolutionary mode? Yes, we can. Okay. Where did we stop? Last week we stopped at chapter 4, where Frank was absolutely humiliated, which was entirely his own fault, going on a pretentious rant among people that are your level, just exposing how pretentious you are. But it's pretentious because you are not aware of how much they see through your BS actually. So um and then he turned 30. So now we're going to what, chapter 5, and we ended the chapter with him thinking to himself that he felt middle age. So what surprises does Frank have for us in chapter 5? I don't know. Stick around, let's find out. Before that, let's get our pens out because I like the phrasing of the descriptive phrasing that is littered around the narration, and I want to keep them in mind. So my pen is here. Chapter 5. I don't have a mic, so at some point it might seem like I am shouting, but I want you guys to understand with me. The architect of Knox building had wasted no time in trying to make it look taller than its 20 stories, with the result that it looked shorter. They hadn't bothered trying to make it handsome either, and so it was ugly, slab-sided and flat-topped with a narrow pea-green cornice that jutted like the lip of a driven stake. It stood in an appropriately humdrum section of lower midtown, and from the very day of its grand opening early in the century, it must clearly have been destined to settle deep into that smoke-hung clutter of numberless rectilinear shapes out of which, in aerial photographs, the mightier towers of New York emerge and rise. But for all its plainness, the Knox building did convey a quality of massive common sense. If it lacked grandeur, at least it had bulk. If there was nothing heroic about it, there was certainly nothing frivolous. It was a building that meant business. There it is, Frank, Wheeler said to his son on a summer morning in 1935. Straight ahead, that's the home office. Better take my hand there. This is a bad crossing. Dot, dot, dot. It was the only time Frank had ever been brought to New York by his father, and it had come as the climax to an exhilarating several weeks that always seemed in retrospect the only time his father could ever have been described as jovial. During that time, the cryptic phrase oat fields had flown in happy profusion through his father's dinner tabletop, along with New York and the Home Office, and I repeatedly caused his mother to say, "Oh, that's wonderful, Earl," and "Oh, I'm so glad." Frank had eventually figured out that Oatfields had nothing whatever to do with Quaker oats, but was in fact the odd name of a man, Mr. Oatfields, a man remarkable not only in his size, one of the biggest men in the Home Office, but in his intellectual astuteness. And he had scarcely put this information straight in his mind before being presented by his mother with some startling news. Mr. Oldfield, upon learning that Mr. Earl Wheeler had a son of 10, had invited our son to accompany his father on a visit to the Home Office. Father and son would then be the guests of Mr. Fields at luncheon. It was the first time he had ever heard her use that word instead of lunch, following which Mr. Fields would take them to a ball game at Yankee Stadium. In the next few days, the suspense had grown all but intolerable until it threatened to spoil everything on the morning of the trip. He very nearly threw up his breakfast from tension and train sickness on the way to town, and might have done it in the taxi too if they hadn't gotten out to walk the last several blocks in the fresh air. But with the clearing of his head as they walked, it began to seem that everything was going to be fine. "There," his father said when they had crossed the street. "Now, here's the barber shop. That's where we're going for our haircut in a minute. And here's the subway. See how they've built the subway entrance right into the building? And look over there. This is the display room. These windows run the entire length of the building from here on. Lot bigger than our dinky old showroom out home, isn't it? And look, these are just a few of the products we make. Here's your typewriters, of course, and your adders and calculators and some of your different kinds of filing systems. And that's one of the new bookkeeping machines back there in the corner. And then look over here in the next window. These are your punched card machines. That big one is your tabulator, and the little one beside it is your sorter. When you watch a demonstration of that baby, it's really a sight to see. Fella takes a deck of punch cards, stacks them, puts them in there, and presses a button, and those old cards go flying through their lickety split. But Frank's eyes kept wandering from the machines to his own reflection in the plate glass. He thought he looked surprisingly dignified in his new suit, with its coat and tie almost exactly like his father's, and it pleased him to see this bright image of the two of them, man and boy, with the endless swarm of people moving past on the sidewalk behind them. After a minute, he backed several steps away and looked straight up until his collar cramped the back of his neck. And wow, he would admit he had hoped for a skyscraper, but the last of his disappointment was vanishing now in this one long look. Up and up and up the tiers of windows rose, each smaller and more foreshortened than the one beneath, until their ever narrowing sills and lintels seemed to merge. Imagine falling from the very top floor. Then he saw that the high cornice was moving slowly and steadily forward against the sky. The building was falling over on them, but there was no time for panic before he saw his mistake. It was the sky that moved, white clouds floating back over the ledge of the roof, and at the instant his mind came into focus on this fact, he felt a shiver of wonder down his spine at the enormous granite strength and stillness of the building. Wow! All set? His father was saying. Let's go to the barber's then and get fixed up, and then we'll go inside. We're going to ride the elevator all the way up to the top. But as things turned out, that preliminary moment on the sidewalk was the high point of the day. The barber shop proved to be nice enough, and so did the echoing marble flagged lobby, which smelled of cigars and umbrellas and ladies' perfume. But from there on, the pleasures of the day began to dwindle steadily. The elevator gave no sense of flight, for one thing, but only of confinement and nausea. Of the office itself, the top floor, he remembered only an acre of white light and a very thin lady whose open work blouse revealed an incredible number of straps that were apparently connected with the underwear, who called him Sonny and showed him how the water cooler worked. Look, Sonny, watch the big bubble come up when I press the button. Blep. Isn't that funny? Here, you try it. And he would never forget the instantaneous revulsion he felt in the presence of Mr. Oldfields, who, if not the biggest, was certainly the fattest man he had ever seen. Okay. Oldfield's glasses mirrored staring images of the office lights so that you couldn't see what his eyes were doing when he talked to you. And he talked in a very loud voice without seeming to hear your replies. Well, aren't you a big fella? What's your name, huh? You like school? Oh, that's fine. You like baseball, huh? The worst part of him was his mouth, which was so wet that a dozen shiny strands of spittle clung and trembled between his moving lips. And it was this as much as anything that hampered Frank's enjoyment of the lunch or luncheon which took place in the restaurant of a great hotel. Oldfield's mouth did not close while chewing, and it left white streaks of food on the rims of his water glass. Once he softened the hard crust of a roll by holding it submerged in the gravy boat for some time before he lifted it to his reaching lips, allowing part of it to fall and leave a bright tan stain on his vest. You are absolutely right, Oat, Wheeler kept saying throughout the meal, and I certainly do agree with you on that. And the few times he glanced at Frank, it was with startled eyes, as if surprised to find him sitting there. The ball game was a letdown too. Nobody hit a home run, and in Frank's limited knowledge of the game, a home run was all that mattered. For the last hour of it, the sun slanted straight in his eyes, giving him a headache, and he had to go to the bathroom but didn't know how to broach the subject. Then came the grimy ordeal of subway connections to Penn Station, during which his father took him angrily to task for having failed to say, "Thank you, I had a very nice time," to Oatfields. In the bleak light of the train shed, as they stood waiting for the gates to open, he stared unnoticed at the physical exhaustion and moral defeat in his father's face, which looked loose and porous and very old. Then, lowering his eyes, he discovered that his father's trouser leg was slightly and rhythmically switching with the anxious movement of his pocketed fingers on his genitals. Ugh. And that ultimately would become his most vivid single remembrance of the day. At the time, though, later that same night, as he staggered and crouched barefoot in the tilting, oddly shrunken bathroom of his home, it was his memory's vision of Oatfield's eating mouth that made the spasms of vomiting come again and again. Not until years later was he able to piece the simple facts of the case together. L. Wheeler, having clung to an assistant branch managership in Newark through any number of depression layoffs and cutbacks, had somehow come to home office attention as a candidate for the job of right-hand man to Oatfields. And not until later still did he get the explanation of that name. The fact that in a world of mandatory diminutives, a corporation of Jolly Bills and Jacks and Herbs and Teds, in which an unabbreviable given name like L must have always been a minor handicap. Oates was the best that could be done for a man with the given name of Otis. But the promotion had fallen through. Higher authority had decreed that Oatfield could get along without a right-hand man, and Earl Wheeler must either have learned or guessed this outcome at some point during the luncheon or the ball game. And whether or not he ever came to accept the disappointment, Frank knew that to the end of his life he never understood it. It must, for that matter, have been the first of many events that passed Earl Wheeler's understanding, for it came at the beginning of his decline. In the years after that, he was transferred from one field assignment to another until his retirement soon after the war, and not long after Oatfield's own retirement and death, by which time he had slipped from the assistant manager level to that of an ordinary salesman in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And in those years too, with increasing bewilderment, he had failed to understand the weakening of his health, the rapid difficult aging of his wife, the indifference of his two older sons, and finally the shrill rebellion, the desertion and the moral collapse of his youngest. A longshoreman, a cafeteria cashier, an ungrateful, spiteful, foul-mouthed weakling, bullying his way through Greenwich Village with God only knew what kind of companions. A punk kid with no more sense of decency than to drive his mother nearly out of her mind, not writing for 6, 8 months, and then mailing a letter with no return address, and the postscript, "Got married last week, might bring her out sometime." It was a lucky thing for Earl Wheeler then that he wasn't present in a cheap bar near the Columbia campus one noontime in 1948 when his son sat in conference with another slouching youth named Sam, a graduate student in philosophy who held a part-time job in the student placement office. "So what's the problem, Frank? I thought you'd be back in Europe by now." Big joke. April knocked up. Oh, Jesus. No, but listen, there are all different kinds of way of looking at a thing like this, Sam. Look at it this way. I need a job, okay? Is there any reason why the job I get has to louse me up? Look, all I want is to get enough dough coming in to keep us solvent for the next year or so, till I can figure things out. Meanwhile, I want to retain my own identity. Therefore, the thing I'm most anxious to avoid is any kind of work that can be considered interesting in its own right. I want something that can't possibly touch me. I want some big swollen old corporation that has been bumbling along making money in its sleep for 100 years, where they have to hire 8 guys for every one job because none of them can be expected to care about whatever boring thing it is they're supposed to be doing. I want to go into that kind of place and say, "Look, you can have my body and my nice college boy smile for so many hours a day in exchange for so many dollars, and beyond that we'll leave each other strictly alone." Get the picture? "I think so," said the philosophy student, coming back to the office, and there, adjusting his glasses and thumbing through a card index, Sam began to write out a list of companies that seemed to fit the picture. A great copper and brass manufacturer, a great public utility, a gigantic firm that made all kinds of paper bags, dot dot dot. But when Frank saw the awesome name of Knox Business Machines being added to the list, he thought there must be some mistake. Hey, no, wait a minute. I know that can't be right. And he gave a brief oral summary of his father's career, which caused the philosophy student to enjoy a pleasant chuckle. I think you'll find things have changed a little since your old man's time, Frank. That was the depression, don't forget. Besides, he was out in the field. You'd be in the home office. As a matter of fact, this place is just what you're looking for. I happen to know they've got guys sitting around that building that never lift a finger except to pick up their checks. I'd certainly mention your father though when you go for the interview. Probably help things along. But Frank, as he walked into the shadow of the Knox building with the ghost of that other visit crowding his head, better take my hand here, this is a bad crossing, decided it would be more fun not to mention his father in the interview at all. And he didn't. And he got a job that very day on the 15th floor in something called the sales promotion department. The sales what? April inquired. Promotion? I don't get it. What does that mean you're supposed to do? Who the hell knows? They explained it to me for half an hour and I still don't know. And I don't think they do either. No, but it's pretty funny, isn't it? Old Knox business machines. Wait till I tell the old man. Wait till he hears I didn't even use his name. And so it started as a kind of joke. Others might fail to see the humor of it, but it filled Frank Wheeler with a secret astringent delight as he discharged his lazy duties, walking around the office in a way that had lately become almost habitual with him, if not quite truly characteristic, since having been described by his wife as terrifically sexy, a slow cat-like stride, proudly muscular, but expressing a sleepy disdain of tension or hurry. And the best part of the joke was what happened every afternoon at 5. Buttoned up and smiling among the Knoxmen, nodding goodnight as the elevator set him free, he would take a crosstown bus and a downtown bus to Bethune Street, where he would mount 2 flights of slope-treaded, creaking stairs, open a wide door so overlaid with many generations of soiled and blistered paint that its surface felt like the flesh of a toadstool, and let himself into a wide clean room that smelled faintly of cigarette and candle wax and tangerine peel and eau de cologne. And there a beautiful disheveled girl would be waiting, a girl as totally unlike the wife of a Knox man as the apartment was unlike a Knox man's home. Instead of after work cocktails, they would make after work love, sometimes on the bed and sometimes on the floor. Sometimes it was 10 o'clock before they roused themselves and strolled into the gentle evening streets for dinner, and by then the Knox building could have been 1,000 miles away. By the end of the first year, the joke had one thing, and the inability of others to see the humor of it had become depressing. Oh, you mean your father worked there? They would say when he tried to explain it, and their eyes, as often as not, would then begin to film over with the look that people reserve for earnest, obedient, unadventurous young men. Before long, and particularly after the second year, with both his parents dead, he had stopped trying to explain that part of it and begun to dwell instead on other comic aspects of the job, the absurd discrepancy between his own ideals and those of Knox business machines, the gulf between the amount of energy he was supposed to give the company and the amount he actually gave. I mean, the great advantage of a place like Knox is that you can sort of turn off your mind every morning at 9 and leave it off all day, and nobody knows the difference. More recently still, and particularly since moving to the country, he had taken to avoiding the whole topic whenever possible, by replying to the question of what he did for a living that he didn't do anything really, that he had the dullest job we could possibly imagine. On the Monday morning after the end of the Laurel Players, he walked into the Knox building like an automaton. The show windows were featuring a new display, bright cardboard images of thin, fashionable young women who grinned and pointed their pencil at emblazoned lists of product benefits, speed, accuracy, control, and beyond them across the deep carpeted expanse of the display floor, a general sampling of the products themselves stood poised for demonstration. Some of them, the simpler ones, were much like the machines that had kindled his father's enthusiasm 20 years before. Though the angular black designs of those days had all been modified to fit the globular sculptured forms of their new casings, which were the color of oyster meat. But there were others equipped to deal with the facts of business at speeds more lickety split than anything a Wheeler could have dreamed of. These, ready to purr and blink with electronic mystery, grew more and more imposing across the floor until they culminated in the big inscrutable component of the Knox 500 electronic computer, a machine which, according to the museum card displayed at its base, could perform the lifetime work of a man with a desk calculator in 30 minutes. But Frank moved past the display room without a glance, and his actions on entering the lobby were absent-mindedly expert. He obeyed the pointed finger of the elevator starter without quite being aware of it. Nor did he notice which of the six elevator operators it was who sleepily made him welcome. He almost never did, unless it happened to be one of those two whose presence could be faintly oppressive. The very old man whose knees were so sprung that painful-looking bulges pressed against the back of his trousers, or the enormous boy whom some glandular disorder had afflicted with the high hips of a woman and the downy head and beardless face of an infant. Pressed well back into the polite in the polite bandage of the car, he heard the sliding door clamp shut and the safety gate go rattling after it. And as the car began to rise, he was surrounded by the dissonant conversations of his colleagues. He had a deep measured voice of the Great Plains, rich with distance and travel and the best accommodations. Of course, we did hit a little bumpy weather coming into Chicago. Sound out in counterpoint to the abrupt and sibilant accent of the city. So I says, what you are kidding? What you are kidding? He says, no, listen, I'm not kidding. While a softened medley of 8 or 10 voices, male and female, repeated their hushed morning courtesies under the buzz of the overhead fan. Then it was time to begin the nodding, sidestepping ritual of making way for the people who edged towards the front with murmurs of out please, and to wait while the door slid open and shut again. The 8th, the 11th, the 12th, the 14th. At first glance, all the upper floors of the Knox building looked alike. Each was a big open room ablaze with fluorescent ceiling lights that had been divided into a maze of aisles and cubicles by shoulder-high partitions. The upper panels of these dividers, waist to shoulder, were made of thick unframed plate glass that was slightly corrugated to achieve a blue-white semi-transparency, and the overall effect of this to a man getting off the elevator and looking out across the room was that of the wide indoor lake in which swimmers far and near were moving, some making steady headway, some treading water, others seen in the act of breaking to the surface or going under, and many submerged, their faces losing into wavering pink blurs as they drowned at their desks. But the illusion was quickly dispelled on walking further into the office, for here the air was an overwhelming dryness. It was, as Frank Wheeler often complained, enough to dry your goddamn eyeball out. For all his complaints, though, he was sometimes guiltily aware of taking a dim pleasure in the very discomfort of the office. When he said, as he had been saying for years, that in a funny way he guessed he would miss Old Knox when he quit, he meant, of course, that it was the people he would miss. I mean, hell, they're a pretty decent crowd, some of them anyway. And yet, in all honesty, he could not have denied a homely affection for the place itself, the 15th floor. Over the years, he had discovered slight sensory distinctions between it and all the others of the building. It was no more or less pleasant, but different for being his floor. It was his bright, dry daily ordeal, his personal measure of tedium. It had taught him new ways of spacing out the hours of the day. Almost time to go down for coffee, almost time to go out for lunch, almost time to go home. And he had come to rely on the desolate waste of time that lay between those pleasures, as an invalid comes to rely on the certainty of recurring pain. It was a part of him. Morning Frank, said Vince Lacthrop. Morning Frank, said Ed Small. Morning Mr. Wheeler, said Grace Mancuso, who worked for Herb Underwood in market research. His feet knew where to turn at the high-marked sales promotion, and he knew how many steps would bring him past the first 3 cubicles, and where he would have to turn again to enter the fourth. He could have done it in his sleep. "Hello," said Maureen Groove, who served as floor receptionist and worked in Mrs. Jorgensen's typing pool. She said it in a frankly flattering, definitely feminine way, and as she swayed aside to let him pass, he wanted to put his arm around her and lead her away somewhere. The mail room, the freight elevator, where he could sit down and take her on his lap and remove her royal blue sweater and fill his mouth with one and then the other of her breasts. It wasn't the first time this idea had occurred to him. The difference was that this time it had no sooner occurred to him than he thought, why not? His feet had led him to the entrance of the cubicle whose plastic nameplate read J.R. Ordway, F.H. Wheeler, and he paused there, one hand hooked over the rim of the plate glass to turn and look back at her. She was all the way down to the end of the aisle now, her buttocks moving nicely in her flannel skirt, and he watched her until she disappeared beneath the waterline of partition tops to take her place at the reception desk. Take it easy, he counseled himself. A thing like this would need a little planning. The first thing to do, he knew, was to go on inside and say good morning to Jack Ordway and take off his coat and sit down. He did that, instantly shutting out his view of everything beyond the cubicle walls. And as he settled himself sideways at his desk, with his right foot automatically throwing open a lower drawer and using its edge as a footrest, the pressure of his shoe over the years had worn a little saddle in the edge of that particular drawer. He allowed a slow wave of delight to break over him. Why not? Hadn't she been giving him every possible encouragement for months, undulating past him in the aisle like that, bending close over his desk to hand him a folder, smiling in a special oblique way that he had never seen her use on anyone else. That time at the Christmas party, he could still remember the taste of her mouth. Hadn't she trembled in his arms and hadn't she whispered, "You're sweet"? Why not? Oh, not in the mailroom or the freight elevator. But didn't she probably have an apartment somewhere with a roommate? And wouldn't the roommate probably be out all day? Jack Ordway was talking to him, requiring him against his will to look up and say, "What's that?" An intrusion by almost anyone else wouldn't have mattered. He could have nodded and made the right replies while keeping most of his mind free for Maureen Grube. But Ordway was different. "I said, I'm going to need your help this morning, Franklin," he was saying. "This is an emergency. I'm dead serious, old scout." He was apparently studying a sheaf of typewritten papers on his desk. The picture of concentration. Only someone who knew what to look for could have told that the hand which seemed to be shading his eyes was really holding his head up, and that his eyes were shut. In his early 40s, slight and trim, with the graying hair and wittily handsome face of a romantic actor, he was the kind of borderline alcoholic whose salvation seems to lie in endless renewals of his ability to laugh the whole thing off. And he was the sentimental hero of the office. Everybody loved Jack Ordway. Today he was wearing his English suit, the suit he had ordered from a touring London tailor some years before. At the cost of half a month's salary, the suit whose cuff buttons really buttoned and whose high-backed trousers could only be worn with suspenders or braces. The suit that was never seen without a fresh linen handkerchief spilling from its breast pocket, but his long narrow feet, which lay splayed with childish awkwardness under the desk, betrayed a pitifully all-American look. They were encased in cheap orange-brown loafers, badly scuffed, and the reason for this clashing notes was that the one thing Jack Ordway could not do in the grip of a really bad hangover was to tie a pair of shoelaces. For the next, he was saying in a hoarse, unsteady voice, "For the next 2 or possibly 3 hours, you have to warn me of bandits every approach. You have to protect me from Mrs. Jorgensen, and you may have to screen me from public view in case I begin to throw up. It's that bad." The capsule story of Jack Ordway's life had become a minor legend of the 15th floor. Everyone knew of how he had married a rich girl and lived on her inheritance until it vanished just before the war. How since then his business career had been spent entirely in the Knox building, in one glass cubicle after another, and how it had been distinguished by an almost flawless lack of work. Even here in sales promotion, where nobody worked very hard, except old Bandy, the manager, he had managed to retain his unique reputation. Except when a really bad hangover laid him low, he was up and around and talking all day, setting off little choruses of laughter wherever he went, sometimes even winning a tolerant chuckle from Bandy himself. driving Mrs. Jorgensen into fits of helpless giggles that made her weep. First of all, he was saying now, on Saturday, these crazy friends of Sally's flew in from the coast, all eager for the treat. Could we show them the town? Oh, indeed we could. Old bodies of hers and all that. And besides, they always bring pockets full of loot. So, started off with lunch at Andre's, and dear God, you've never seen such whooping great martinis in your life. Oh, and none of this sissy business of one or two apiece either, buddy. I lost count. And then let's see. Oh yes. Then there was nothing to do but sit around and drink until cocktail time. Then came cocktail time. He had abandoned his walking posture now and pushed the false papers aside and leaned delicately back in the chair to hold his head with both hands. He was moving it from side to side in rhythm of his narrative, laughing and talking through his laughter while Frank watched him with a mixture of pity and distaste. Most of his hangover stories seemed to begin with a flying in of Sally's crazy friends from the coast, or from the Bahamas, or from Europe, with pocketfuls of loot. And Sally herself was always featured at the center of the fun, the former debutante, the chic, childless wife, and irrepressible playmate. That at least was the way his listeners on the 15th floor were expected to picture her. Frank had been able to do so and to picture their apartment as a kind of Noel Coward stage setting until the time he went home with Ordway for a drink and found that Sally was massively soft and wrinkled, a sudden aging woman with lips forever painted in that petulant Cupid's bow of her youth. Her every whining intonation of Jack's name that night as she swayed bewildered through rooms of rotten leather and dusty silver and glass showed how deeply she blamed him for allowing the world to collapse. Once she had turned up her eyes to the paint flake Once she had turned up her eyes to the paint-flaked ceiling, as if calling on God to punish him, this weak, foolish little man for whom she had sacrificed her very life, who poisoned all her friendships with his endless counting of pennies, who insisted on grubbing at his dreary, dreary white-collar job and bringing dreary office people home with him, and Jack, apologetically hovering and making little jokes, had called her mother. And as for how we got back from Idlewild, he was saying, it's a thing I'll never know. My last completely clear recollection is of standing in the Idlewild lounge at 3 o'clock this morning and wondering if someone would please tell me how we had gotten there in the first place. Oh no, wait. After that, there was something about a hamburger joint. Oh no, I think that was earlier. When the story was over at last, he removed his hands from his head experimentally and frowned and blinked several times. Then he announced that he was beginning to feel a little better. Good. Frank dropped his foot from the drawer and got settled at his desk. He had to think, and the best way to think was to go through the motions of working. This morning's batch of papers was waiting in his in basket on top of last Friday's, and so his first action was to turn the whole stack upside down on his desk and start from the bottom, as he did each day, or rather on the days when he bothered with the in basket. For there were many days when he left it alone. He tried first to see how many papers he could get rid of without actually reading their content. Some could be thrown away, others could be almost as rapidly disposed of by scrolling. What about this in their margins with his initials and sending them to Bandy, or by writing "know anything on this" and sending them to someone like Ed Small next door? But the danger here was that the same papers might come back in a few days marked "do" from Bandy and "no" from Small. A safer course was to mark a thing file for Mrs. Jorgensen and the girls, and after the briefest possible glance had established that it wasn't of urgent importance. If it was, he might mark it file and follow 1 week, or he might put it aside and go to the next one. The gradual accumulation of papers put aside in this way was what he turned to as soon as he was finished with or tired of the in basket. Arranging them in an approximate order of importance, he would interleave them in the same order with those of the 6 or 8 inch stack that always lay near the center of the desk, held down by a glazed ceramic paperweight that Jennifer had made for him in kindergarten. This was his current work pile. Many of the papers in it bore the insignia of Bandy's Do or Ed Small's No, and some had been through the file and follow cycle as many as 3 or 4 times. Some bearing notes like "Frank might look into this" were the gifts of men who used him as he used the small. Occasionally he would remove a piece of current work and placed it in the equally high secondary pile that lay on the far right hand corner of the desk under a leading scale model of Knox 500 electronic computer. This was the pile of things he couldn't bring himself to face just now, and the worst of them, sometimes whole bulging folders filled with scrawled over typewritten sheets and loose, sliding paper clips would eventually go into the stuffed bottom right hand drawer of the desk. The papers in there were of the kind that Audrey called real goodies, and that drawer opposite to the one that served as a footrest had come to occupy a small nagging place in Frank's conscience. He was as shy of opening it as if it held live snakes. Why not? Wouldn't it be perfectly easy to walk up and ask her out to lunch? No, it wouldn't. That was the trouble. An unspoken rule of the 15th floor divided the men from the girls on all but business matters, except at Christmas parties. The girls made separate arrangements for lunch in the same inviolable way that they used a separate laboratory, and only a fool would openly defy the system. This would need a little planning. This would need a little planning. He was still in the middle of the in basket when a thin, smiling face and a round, solemn one appeared above the glass wall, looking in from the next cubicle. They were the faces of Vince Lathrop and Ed Small, and this meant it was time to go down for coffee. "Gentlemen," said Miss Lathrop, "shall we dance?" Half an hour later, they were back in the office, having heard at some length about Ed Small's difficulties with grass seed and lawn care in Rose Lane, Long Island. The coffee had helped strengthen Ordway, and though it was clear now that what he really needed was a drink, and it was clear now that what he really needed was a drink, and to prove how much better he felt, he was pacing up and down the cubicle and going through his impersonation of Bandy, wobbling his head and repeatedly sucking at his side tooth with little kissing sound. Well, but I wonder if we're really being effective, and that's the thing, kiss. Because if we really want to be effective, then we're going to have to get in there and be more, be more effective. Frank was trying for the second or third time to read the top paper on his current work pile, which seemed to be a letter from the branch manager in Toledo, but its paragraphs were as opaque as if it had been typed in a foreign language. He closed his eyes and rubbed them and tried again, and this time he made it. The branch manager in Toledo, who in Enoch's tradition referred to himself as "we," wished to know what action had been taken on his previous correspondence with regard to the many serious errors and misleading statements in SP 1109, a copy of which was attached. This proved to be a thick quoted stock, four-color brochure entitled "Pinpoints of Production Control with the Knox 500," and the sight of it brought back uneasy memories. It had been produced many months before by a nameless copywriter in an agency that had since lost its Knox account and had been released to the field in tens of thousands of copies marked "Address all inquiries, F.H. Wheeler, Home Office." Frank had known at the time that it was a mess. Its densely printed pages defied simple logic as well as readership, and its illustrations were only sporadically related to its text. But he let it go anyway, chiefly because Bandy had confronted him in the eye one day with a kiss on the side of the tooth and said, "Haven't we released that brochure yet?" Since then, the inquiries addressed to F.H. Wheeler had come in slow, embarrassing streams from all parts of the United States, and he was dimly aware of something particularly urgent about those that had been coming from Toledo. The next paragraph reminded him, "As you will recall, it was our intention to order 5,000 additional copies of the brochure for distribution at the annual NAPE convention, National Association of Production Executives, here June 10 to 13. However, as stated in previous correspondence, the brochure is in our opinion so inferior that it does not fulfill its purpose in any way, shape or manner. Therefore, please advise immediately re our inquiry in previous correspondence, namely, what arrangements are being made to have a revised version of the brochure in our office not later than June 8 in the required number of copies." He looked quickly at the upper left-hand corner and was relieved to find that the letter had not carried a carbon to Bandy. That was a piece of luck. But even so, this had all the earmarks of a real goodie. Even if there was still time to arrange for a new brochure to be produced, and there probably wasn't, he would have to clear the job through Bandy, and Bandy would want to know why he hadn't been told about it 2 months earlier. He was in the act of laying the thing on the secondary pile when the beginnings of a bright idea came through his confusion, and suddenly he was out of the cubicle and walking towards the front of the office with his hat in his mouth. She was at her desk in the reception area with nothing to do, and when she looked up, her eyes were so full of pleased expectancy, of complicity, it almost seemed that he nearly forgot what it was he had to pretend he had come for. Maureen, he said, moving up close and taking hold of the back of her chair. If you're not too busy, I wonder if you'd help me find some stuff in the central file. You see this? He laid the brochure on her desk as if it were an intimate revelation, and she leaned forward from the hips to examine it, so that her breast swung close to his pointing hand. Hmm? The thing is, it's got to be revised. That means I've got to dig up all the material that went into it right from the scratch. Now, if you look into the inactive file under SP 1109, you'll find copies of all the stuff we sent to the agency. And then if you check each of those papers, you'll find another code number referring you to other files. That way we can trace the thing back to original sources. Come on, I'll help you get started. All right. As he moved up the aisle behind her hips, he felt the promise of triumph in his expanding chest, and soon they were alone together in the labyrinth of the central file, enveloped in her perfume as they fingered nervously through a drawer of folders. 11 oh what did you say? 11 oh what did you say? 1109. Should be right there somewhere. For the first time, he allowed himself to scrutinize her face. It was round and wide-nosed and not really very pretty. He could afford to admit that now, and he could afford to admit that now. And its too heavy makeup was probably there to hide a bad complexion, just as the little black tails she had drawn at the corner of her eyes were there to make the eyes look larger and farther apart. Her carefully arranged hair was probably her greatest problem. It must have been a shapeless frizzled bush when she was a child, and must still give her trouble in the brain. But her mouth was wonderful. Perfect teeth and plump, subtly shaped lips that had the texture of marzipan. He found that if he focused his eyes on her mouth so that the rest of her face was slightly blurred, and then drew back to include the whole length and shape of her in that hazy image, it was possible to believe he was looking at the most desirable woman in the world. Here, she said, now, you want all the folders relating to all those other code numbers, is that it? That's it. It may take a little time. I hope you weren't planning on an early lunch. No, I didn't have any special plans. Good. I'll stop back in a while and see how you're doing. Thanks a lot, Maureen. You're very welcome. And he went back to his cubicle and sat down. It was a perfect arrangement. He could wait here until the rest of the floor had emptied out for lunch. Then he would go back and get her. His only problem now was to think of an excuse for not going out to lunch in the usual way with the usual crowd. An excuse, if possible, that would cover him for the rest of the afternoon. It's a deep masculine voice inquired, and this time three heads hung above the partition. They were the heads of Lathrop, Small, and the man who had spoken. A grey mountain of a man with heavy eyebrows and a clenched pipe, whose bulk rose high enough above the glass to reveal that he wore a defiantly unbusinesslike checked shirt, hairy wool tie, and pepper and salt jacket. This was Sid Roscoe, the literary and political sage of the 15th floor, a self-described old newspaper guy who contemptuously edited the employee house organ Knox News. Come on, you characters, he said heartily. On your feet. Jack Ordway obeyed him, pausing only to murmur, ready, Franklin. But Frank held back, inspecting his watch with the look of a man pressed for time. Guess I won't be able to make it today, he said. Got some people to see uptown this afternoon. I'll probably stop for a bite up there too. Oh, for God's sakes, Wheeler, Ordway said, turning on him. There was a disproportionate amount of shock and disappointment on his face. A look of, but you've got to come with us, and it took Frank a second to realize what the trouble was. Ordway needed him. With Frank along for moral support, it would be possible to steer the group to what Ordway called the nice place, the dark German restaurant where a round of weak but adequate martinis came floating to your table, almost as a matter of course. Without him, under Roscoe's leadership, they would almost certainly go to the awful place, a bright, mercilessly clean luncheonette called Waffle Heaven, where you couldn't even get a glass of beer, and where the cloying smells of melting butter and maple syrup were enough to make you retch into your tiny paper napkin. There would then be nothing for Jack Ordway to do but sit and hold himself together until they brought him back to the office and set him free to sleep out again for the couple of quick ones he would need to survive the afternoon. Please, his comically round eyes implored as he led him away. Please don't let this happen to me. But Frank sat firm, thumbing the edges of his current work file. He waited until they were safely in the elevator, and then he continued to wait. 10 minutes went by, and 20, and still the office seemed much too crowded. Then at last he half rose from his chair and peeked out over the surface of the partition tops in all directions. Maurice's head moved alone above the waterline of the central file. There were a few other heads bunched near the elevators and a few others scattered in far corners, but there was no point in waiting any longer. The office will never be emptier than this. He buttoned his coat and stalked out of the cubicle. That's fine, Maureen, he said, bearing down on her and taking the batch of folders and papers from my hand. I don't think we'll need any more than that. Well, but it's only about half the stuff though. I mean, didn't you want all of it? Tell you what, let's not worry about it. How about some lunch? All right, I'd love to. He was all action as he hurried back to his desk to drop the papers and dodged into the men's room to wash up. But when he went to stand by the elevators waiting for her to come out of the ladies' room, he was all worried. The small crowd around the elevators was beginning to include people coming back from lunch. If she didn't hurry up, they might run into Audrey and the others. What the hell was she doing in there? Standing with her arms around three other girls in a paralysis of laughter at the very idea of going out with Mr. Wheeler. Then suddenly she was walking towards him in a light coat and the elevator was sliding open and the operator's voice was saying down. He stood a little behind her and held himself in a rigid parade rest as they dropped through space. All the restaurants for blocks around would be loaded with knocked people. He would have to get her out of the neighborhood, and as they moved through the lobby, he touched her elbow as hesitantly as if it were her breast. Listen, he mumbled, there aren't any decent places to eat around here. You mind taking a short trip? We're out on the sidewalk now, jostled by the crowd, and he stood smiling like an idiot for what seemed a full minute of indecision before the word taxi popped into his head. Then all at once it made him feel so fine to see one slowing down under the command of his wagging arm, and so splendid to see her smile and bend and climb gracefully into his deep seat that he didn't give a damn about what he saw from the corner of his eye at that moment. The unmistakable bulk of Sid Roscoe in the crowd, flanked by the familiar shapes of Lathrop and Small and Ordway, coming from the direction of the awful place. It was impossible to tell whether they had seen him or not, and he instantly decided it didn't matter. He slammed the door and allowed himself one more glance through the window of the cab as he pulled away from the curb, and he wanted to laugh out aloud at the sight of Jack Ordway's orange loafers flapping along through the forest of legs and feet. Finally, we're done with chapter 5. Okay, so this chapter, not much phrases to keep in like that were memorable because it has to do with his job. And the author is very interesting in that every time we're introduced to an aspect of Frank's life, we are giving Frank's or Frank relates or narrates to us the origin of that aspect of his life, you know, the backstory, what we need to know about that aspect of his life. April, when we introduced to April, the first chapter in her play, he told us how they met, he told us how they dated, he told us how they whatever. Then we got into his family life in the next chapter. And in his family life, we saw his dynamics with his children, how he was in the family to his wife and his children. And then in the third chapter, we met his friends, Chef Campbell, the Campbells. So, and then he gave us a background of the Campbells, how we met them, how they relate to each other, why they are friends and all. Now we are dealing with his work, and it is so detailed. It is boring. It was boring to read. Like it was interesting in the sense of the like I know like the story itself, yeah. Like because of Frank, like Frank is interesting, yeah, to read about, you know. But the backstory, the build up, like the reason why like he's at the job, the history with his father, everything, his colleagues, the girl he's trying to sleep with, all of it is just especially his detailed description of the building, like where he worked, the Knox building, it is so detailed. Like it was like, God, what is going on here? But every part of those details, you know, every detail of his narration was actually important to saying, to giving us a good, like the way I feel reading it is probably like a fraction of how Frank feels living in that reality. Yeah. So I think it's a very visceral showing, you know. It's a very, despite how much narration and details there are, it's still showing us, like it's showing me as far as I can, like I'm reading it here, it's showing me the reality of Frank's mundane life as this kind of office worker working in sales promotion, and how mediocre it is, you know, and how the whole overarching the pressure of not living up to his potential, you know, how he views himself. Imagine getting a job so that you can make it a lifelong joke of saying how you are pulling a fast one on your father, like the father works here but you are working here, and you're not working here really, you're not putting your passion into it, you're just doing what you like. And like imagine just choosing a job like that. Like how silly do you have to be to put this major part of your life as a reason, as your motive, like this major part of your life, yeah, you are hanging it on just making a fool out of other people, or making a fool out of your father, or picking it based on your resentment of your potential that you've not, like I don't know if you get it, Sha, but it was just very funny as usual. Frank is a very funny character because a lot of things he does are not for his own benefit. He's doing it to make people see something, to prove a point to people. Like he's living his life for outsiders basically. So like after a year, of course, the joke is going to get stale. Not everybody's going to get this freaking joke you think is so funny. And like what do you do after the joke goes stale? You didn't think of that. So like it's just interesting. I'm interested to see now that his colleagues, caught him in the act of taking a girl to somewhere that is not his wife or whatever. I'm curious to see how that plays out, like in his life, because as it is going, all these things we are seeing, he's living, he's not just sitting somewhere telling us story, he's living through it, yeah. So he's making conscious decisions here. He's seeing all the aspects of which he really can't say, but he's making decisions that he wants to make, which are immature, based off of proving his masculinity. Like he literally berated this girl's looks for from her face to her complexion to her hair. How do you know her hair would frizzle in the rain? It's not something that somebody that is very vain will pay attention to. Like he doesn't even, he just, and that means his the idea of having an affair with her is not even for the pleasure of it. It's just to prove a point to himself that he's a man probably, or that his life can be interesting as he likes, or he can cheat on his wife or something. Like just a very funny character. Anyway, I thank you for paying attention and for watching me. And yes, look forward to my very. How many people are going to bet? Like, if I'm going to finish this book this month, it's like how many days left? 18 days. Yeah, can I finish this book in 18 days or less, or can I even finish it at all? Anyways, thank you for being here. I really appreciate your presence, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye. Oh, I made this hat myself.